Okay, anyway. Um, what's this event handler here? This one here? Text changed. Okay? And that's going to mean what? Whenever someone types in here, that event is, we say that event is fired, and then this event handler will handle it. So what do we want it to do? Well, it's not, wait, before we answer that question, what's this one? What's this code here? Is this a method or a function? A method or a function? It's a function. What's the difference between I'm sorry, is it a subroutine or a function? It's a function. What's the difference between a subroutine and a function? A function will return a value. Okay, so what's the name of this function? What's the name of it? Count characters, right? Okay, so what is it, obviously what's it going to do? It's going to count the characters, okay? What's the name of the parameter, the input parameter for this function? What's the name of the parameter? Input text, right? It's input text. What are we gonna, how are we gonna use this function? How are we gonna use this function? How are we gonna use this function? What are we gonna use it for? How are we gonna use it, or what are we gonna use it for? This count characters function. What are we going to use it for? To what? To count the characters in what? In the text box. And how are we going to access the characters in the text box? It's the text property, right? It's the text property of the text box, right? Okay, so we're going to take that and we're going to put it in the function, right? So the string that's in here is going to go into this function. Okay, and then this function is going to do what with it? What's the local name of the input? What's the local name of the input? Means local to this function. What's the local name to this to the input? It's called input text, right? So the function is going to call it input text, and so what's this mean? This means the length of the input text. In other words, the length of the string in here, right? So that's exactly what we want. We said the length property will give us what we want. So what is this function going to return? The length of the string. Okay? So so that's the definition of this function. Now where should we use this function? Where should we use it? When should we call it? When should we use it? Well, we said we want to use it whenever, or one time that we want to use it is whenever something changes in here, right? Whenever something changes in here, we want to call that function. So how do we do that? That's the text changed subroutine, or event handler. Okay, so we want to put the count characters function in this text changed event handler. Okay? And what do we want to, where do we want to feed it into? The count characters, remember the count character is going to output a number. It's going to output how many characters there are, and where do we want to feed that into? Where do we feed it into? Here. Where do we feed it into? Into this label, right? Okay? So that should work. Okay, does everyone get the idea of this program? Okay? Okay, good. So if you try it, it should work. Should be able to show you. But you have to have this thing checked. Well, actually, no, actually you don't, do you? No. At this point, you don't need this thing checked. Actually, it's ignoring these two things so far. Okay, it doesn't even consider these two. It just sees what's in here. Whenever something changes, it calls this function, which counts how many characters there are, and outputs it to this label. Okay? Any question about that? Okay. So we have one more to do. Ability 2 is to count the words. Okay? So let's read what he says. Again, our goal is to make a tool with two abilities. Ability 1, count the characters in the input text using the property string.length, we just did that, and the text box event listener text change, we just used that. And ability 2, count the words in the input text. Now let's upgrade our tool to perform its second ability. Now, first of all, just recognize that we didn't even consider the radio buttons in the last iteration of this program, but we do want to consider the radio buttons, so we'll have to. So here's the new code. So we don't have time to go through it all right now, so let's just explain the general idea. Okay, what's this? First thing. This is a function. In fact, that's the function we already just typed in. What's it called again? Count characters. And what does it do? It counts how many characters there are. So we don't always want to use that, right? We only want to use it when? When this button is checked, right? Otherwise, we don't want to use that function. Okay, but anyway, we will want to use it at some point. Then what's this one? This is also a what? A function. And what's it called? Count words. So it's going to do something different than count characters, right? And when will we want, well, of course, what is it going to do? It's going to count how many words there are, right? And when do we want to call this function? Only when what? When this button is checked, right? When the count words button is checked, right? Okay, that makes sense, right? Okay, so how does this function work though? Well, here, if the input text, what does the input text mean, by the way? What does this mean? What is this? This is this, right? This is the input in our count words function, right? It's the parameter name, right? So whatever we call it on, it's referred to as input text. So what does this first line mean? If input text is what? What does this mean? Empty, right? If the input text is empty, then what do? We return 0. There's no words, right? Okay? And then as soon as we write return 0, that means we exit this function. So none of this will get run in that case, by the way. Okay, but if it's not true, then what do we do next? This. So here, I explained this, remember? What's this? Here. I explained this at the beginning of class. What is this? What is that? This splits the input text based on what character? On an empty space, right? So whenever there's an empty space, it'll split it. And what's the output of this whole expression here? I said it already. We already said it at the beginning of class. What's the output? What type of output? What data type will this be? What did we say? It's going to be an array. Okay? It's going to be an array. Is this an array here? Is this an array? Yeah, it's an array. How do I know it's an array? Because it has those brackets. Remember, you learned that, right? If it has brackets, it's an array. So this is an array. And then somebody said it was count. Somebody else said, or I said it might be size, but I thought it was what? Length. I was right, and she was wrong. You were wrong. What? You can also use count here? But this is an array. Okay, maybe she's right, I don't know. Anyway, I think that this is an array, and we use length, but she says no. I don't know. But anyway, I think this is right. So this is an array.length. So that's going to be what? That's going to be the number of so-called words in this input. Okay. So, all right, so that's the count words function. And when do we want to call that? When this button is selected, right? Count words is selected. Okay? Now, well, last thing, I'm sorry, but how much time do we have? No time? No time. All right. Well, last thing is for you to finish reading the PowerPoint yourself. Okay?